There's a Concord coach a-comin', you can hear the people say, from Boston to St. Louis to California. The name of Abbott Downing was known from shore to shore, and the glory of the Concord stage will live forevermore.
Thank you all for coming out in dreadful weather. I appreciate the attendance. So does my husband. Don't you?
Yes.
Okay.
It's the highlight of the day. Thank you.
Not yet.
So David is in charge of answering any questions at the end of this performance. Okay? So you save up the really tough ones for him.
Here are the answers. No, yes.
I especially thank, and I have to read this because I don't want to forget anybody. I especially thank the many people who helped in resuscitating what was a forlorn-looking old coach. And some of those folks are here this evening, I'm very pleased to note. Special thanks to Steve Harris, who's been instrumental in saving this treasure and who captured many images for this production. And thanks to those involved in getting the coach out of the firehouse in a pandemic and back into the firehouse without panic. So you will see yourselves in bookends that accompany this talk.
And the glory of the Concord stage will live forevermore. His name was Lewis Downing, he was only 21. When he journeyed to New Hampshire from his home in Lexington, he'd come to court his true love, and in the month of May, he married Lucy Wheelock and settled down to stay. Now Lewis was a wheelwright like his father was before. He started building wooden sleighs and wagons by the score. He joined with Stevens Abbott, and working side by side, they built the famous coaches that became New Hampshire's pride. There's a Concord coach a-comin', you can hear the people say, from Boston to St. Louis to California. The name of Abbott Downing was known from shore to shore, and the glory of the Concord stage will live forevermore. Each coach was made to order, no two of them the same, of shiny leather, lacquered wood, and sturdy iron frame, in red and gold with fancy scrolls and murals on each side, and with their special Concord springs they gave a smoother ride. O'er the mountains and the prairies, through the sun and wind and rain, through Indians and outlaws and all kinds of terrain, the rugged Concord coaches back in that bygone year helped open up the wilderness and tame the wild frontier. There's a Concord coach a-comin', you can hear the people say, from Boston to St. Louis to California. The name of Abbott Downing was known from shore to shore, and the glory of the Concord stage will live forevermore.
The tip of the hat to Walt Disney, so I don't get into trouble with any rights. Truly is a Cinderella story. You can see what it looked like, perhaps, if it were one of these coaches. Orrin Griffin's coaches and wagons were essentially left to rot in a marsh. This is an image from 1895. How it escaped, how our coach escaped the rubbish heap, and we don't know that it's one of these. It's a bit of a mystery, but we think that Louis Pulsifer, who was Sarah Hackett's grandfather, and Charles Bradley, grandfather and great-grandfather of Squalmers, some of whom might be here tonight, we think they conspired to get it back to the village, and then it was stored in the barn right behind the village hall. 100 years ago, in 1923, Gloucester celebrated its 300th birthday, and the Stagecoach joined the party. James Griffin, he's the son of Orrin, in the top hat was the driver. His daughter Gertrude, who many of you remember, was beside him. And Mrs. Ernest Griffin, with her parasol, was on top. Now, her name really is Leela. Everybody goes by their husband's name, as you know. But she is Leela, and she's the lady in the bottom painting over there in the middle. and the sewing bee. So James has his foot on the brake, as he should, and the horses are being very well behaved. Now, there are 2 horses on most of the images that we have of the coach, but with steep streets, 4 horses would be used. And if you're a real stagecoach driver, you have to have 6. That's sort of the mark of the expert. The children sitting on the luggage rack, we don't know their names, unfortunately. A summer visitor, name of Muriel Duvernay, aided by Ruth Pappas, antiqued the coach in 1930 before Annisbaum's tercentenary celebration. 50 years later, therefore 50 years ago, the coach with Gert Griffin, Molly Andrew, were part of the Gloucester 350th celebration. And in the same era, some celebrities signed the guest book in the firehouse. All right, so you see the top. One is a Big John's store, and I don't know whether it's a person related to Annie or not. We had Foster Damon, Bobby Cavender, who I didn't know, and Kathy's helped me out with this. He lived next to the parsonage, right, Kathy? Right. And died at quite a young age. Walter Olson, Emily Haynes, who I think was Samuel Haynes' wife. And Samuel Haynes was very much involved in the village. Elizabeth McNush on Adams Hill Road. 2 of the Ruggles on Leonard Street. Paul Lundberg on Bridgewater Street. The Indian things are very interesting. Doris Lundberg, his mom. David Lehman on Adams Hill Road, but not for long. We've heard the belasts down the street. Gaddy Smith.
Jetty.
Is that Giddy? How do you spell it?
G-E-E.
G-E. Okay, sorry. Gaddy Smith. Okay. 39, she lived in the house that we live in now. Mark Lundberg, and importantly, one of our AHS members, Bob Robert Cunningham. He's not here tonight, is he? Oh, there you are, Bob. I was going to have you read your own name. Okay, so 40 years later, plus, this is what the inside of the coach looks like. Pretty old, very shabby. What are we going to do? Do we just let it rot? Do we just let it stay like this? What to do is find an expert. And the experts are 2 in number, and the one on the left is Ken Wheeling, and the man on the right is Peter James. Ken is from Vermont. He's very interested in wheeled vehicles, which is lovely because his name is Wheeling. And Peter James has been very much involved with the Concord History Group and the Abbott Downing Historical Society. So they came in September 2015, and they really were like kids in a candy store, looking for the number that this coach might be and have been made by Abbott Downing because it looks like an Abbott Downing coach. They knew where to look on the bottom of one of the jump seats for the serial number. And it's rather indistinct because it's covered in paint. But David was there at the time and used a gravestone rubbing trick. And they were able to bring out very faintly that L1111. So that stood for 54. So that actually makes it a very old coach in the Abbott Downing stable, if you will. In fact, it's probably more of a Downing Abbott, because Downing was in charge of the business at that time. It's much later in the era of stagecoaches that Abbott became the first name. So the first Abbott and Downing coach was finished in 1827. So generally, it's easier to actually talk about Concord coaches. However, Concord in this particular environment sometimes gets translated as Concord, Massachusetts. But these are all New Hampshire coaches. Lewis was a skilled wheelwright and a blacksmith, and he established the business, and he found a journeyman cabinet maker, bodybuilder from Salem. His name was Joseph Stevens Abbott, and he joined Downing in 1828. Now, Lewis Downing actually came from Lexington. If he had stayed in Lexington, these would be Lexington coaches. But his girlfriend was in Concord, New Hampshire. So this is a love story. He shows up in Concord and says, "Ooh, Lucy, this looks like a nice place to set up shop. Why don't you set up shop with me?" And she did. Okay, next. Now the drawing from, I get the right date here, I'm not doing very good on dates, 1870, is that what it says? Keep going to the next one, David. Got them written down, yeah. 1870 to 1890. This was a huge manufacturing plant in Concord. Done, interestingly, these were done by the same cartographers 20 years apart. And you can see that they're prospering because there's an extra set of windows on the building here. So 1890, you can see that there's now more building. Otherwise, looks very similar to before. And interestingly, much of this has disappeared. If you go to Concord now, very hard to find any of those buildings. There was a big fire as well, so most have burned, and there are just a few buildings left which have obviously changed function. So what happened was that we were trying very hard to get local funding for this coach to be restored, and we were turned down by local funding sources. And I just want to mention, there's a character on the right here, his name is John Henschel, stalwart supporter of the Stagecoach, sat in for the conversation. We think that Betsy Horowitz was looking for divine guidance in the background. So all of the folks got together and said, we need to raise some money, and a lot of people helped us do that. And then we need to send the coach out of Annisquam to South Dakota. What? Where? What? So straight talk from the experts. Hanson's Wheel and Wagon in Letcher, South Dakota is the only place on earth, it seems, maybe the universe, that can actually do the work. They don't just resuscitate coaches. All of these vehicles, I guess you could call them, wheels and wagons, all these vehicles are under their roof in terms of being repaired or restored. And our stagecoaches would have been one of those groups that are shown on the bottom rank. So this is what happens. The crack crew gets to move the stagecoach to South Dakota. And inspired by Mr. Abbott's carriage, Dave and Paul practice bodybuilding or back breaking, whichever you feel it was like. This is the coach that was sitting outside, ready to go to South Dakota. It's just a lovely photograph. I think Steve may have taken this. I wasn't here at the time, but it just shows the difference between then and now. At Tally's, the only company to call when your stagecoach needs a lift, mention that. We give them lots of credit. They've been wonderful at helping us out. And then the next slide shows those of you who don't go to South Dakota, usually. It's west of Worcester, and it's south of North Dakota. Now the interesting thing is that the Annisquam coach is a Western model, so it's appropriate it's heading in that direction. And that's purely because of the way the windows are placed and the roll down leather shades. This is not our coach. But compare this, with our coach, it's actually very similar. The windows and the roll down shades. The painting on the door is of a ship, probably because this was going to the Pacific. And it's amazing to me how well these ladies could travel without a hair out of place. Now, this is Stagecoach in 1939, so they were using old Abbott and Downing coaches that had been, put out to pasture, literally. I got this photograph because it was such a fantastic image to show you how many of these coaches left New England. This is on a train that's going to Nebraska. The artist is the same artist who did all the paintings on the coaches in that era. What I wanted to mention too about this, those were traveling west to Wells Fargo. And that was the final chapter of the building of the Union Pacific Railway. So it's ironic that the railway is going to put out those involved in the overland stage route out of business. So this painting was copied from a photograph, and I found the original photograph, but the painting is more dramatic, and you can appreciate that train pulling 30 coaches across the plains. I'm going to read this because it's so interesting. If I can get it, yeah. In 1861, Mark Twain and his brother Orion traveled in a stagecoach from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California. Now that's on the overland route at the time. 11 years later, he wrote the book Roughing It. Our coach was a swinging and swaying cage of the most sumptuous description, an imposing cradle on wheels. It was drawn by 6 handsome horses. We had 3 days delayed mail with us, almost touching our knees. A perpendicular wall of mail matter rose up to the roof. There was a great pile of it strapped on top of the stage, and both the fore and hind boots were full. We had 2,700 pounds of it aboard, the driver said. Now think about it, the coach is about a ton, and then you added this. You certainly need 6 horses to pull all of that weight, plus the people inside. So this again is another film clip from Stagecoach from John Ford. And that's to emphasize why this was such an important advance in travel, this particular coach. It's from an advertising pamphlet put out by, believe it or not, an insurance company. It's the best that I've found to show you the thoroughbraces, which are the important part of the coach's being, if you will. It's completely different from other coaches. Leather bands, leather straps that are going from fore to aft on either side of the coach and literally cradling the coach. The front axle assembly is lower than that of the back, and that smaller diameter front wheels allow better maneuverability. And the driver's brake obviously connects to the rear brake blocks. But the design and the manufacture of the thoroughbraces essentially was revolutionary for that time, and that's what made it so famous. So now our restored coach faces the east. This is in South Dakota, ready to return. And the thoroughbraces you can see is those black bands underneath the coach. I wonder, because of the shape of the coach, which is egg-shaped, and that was the other critical factor, whether Mr. Abbott's carpentry training in Salem, which is where he came from, whether he was the one developing this, because it really does look like a boat, don't you think? The bottom. And the side, next please. And the side view is the port thoroughbrace, just to show you this thick leather that's going forward and aft. And we were all told that this was a single piece of leather, and we were trying to figure out how large the animal was. Show you that in a minute. Next, please. Next, please. And then the front view, just to show you the starboard thoroughbrace, the brake, and the coach lantern. And you can see that the coach is suspended on these leather belts. Now, when we had the coach leaving the firehouse, we were lucky it didn't fall off its worn thoroughbraces. Can you see the difference between top and bottom? And that's the replacement on the bottom. And I think you can, the next picture may have it, may show the, yeah. So you can see that the arrow points to a scarf join in the leather. So it's not a continuous belt in that sense. It does have bands of leather that have been carefully joined together and slung from fore to aft. Lest it be argued that the coach was always yellow, its true first color was red, and it's on a rear under panel which had never been overpainted because it was too difficult to access. And I can attest to that because I lay on the floor to get this photograph to prove it. And can you see the door jamb on the right? Okay, in the past, there had been several coats of paint in different places. Thank you, David, that's good. And this one, the top layer is the red, but sanding back, they got to black, and then red, and then wood. So
No yellow at all.
No, so the areas that they sanded down, they left to show the original colors. And actually, when Doug Hansen was talking to us, he said, you know, the black would have been really looking good on the door jambs. And we went, oh no, please, no. No more. Now, I've shown you this already. 40 years before, old and shabby, and before restoration. The meadow hay that was taken out of the seat cushions came out. They also used horsehair, and they also used cotton to stuff the cushions. That was not replaced. This is not conservation, it's restoration. Okay. Now, the original headliner couldn't be salvaged at all, and the fabric matched as best they could, because of course there's no modern fabrics that are like the old ones. And the leather band that you see across, when the kids come into the firehouse, they look at it and they're so used to seat belts that they think it's a seat belt. But in fact, it's a back brace. So if you're sitting on the jump seat, you can lean backwards and not sit in the lady's lap behind you. And we'll show you in the firehouse that that back belt, if you will, unhooks from the side of the coach so that people can get easy access to the back seat. Roll-up window blinds have been restored with leather on the outside, and I didn't realize that there was lining on the inside until we unrolled one, and it's just glorious when the sun shines on it. It looks like gold. And the linoleum on the floor at the time when we sent it out was covered in gray silt. I didn't even know it was linoleum, and it was carefully cleaned and brought back to its original pattern. So this is truly conservation. They kept it all. You can see the crack in the floor where the jump seat joins onto it. But that's the original pattern. Next, please, Dave. And conservation and restoration were used for the port door. And this taught me a lot about how people go about restoring things. This door before looked terrible, but it could be saved, and they fixed the fabric. And they used a piece of braid from what is called the fall, that was one of the pieces, right there, that was one of the pieces of fabric inside the coach, and they rescued that to put on the door, which is great. So we saved some of that original material, if you will. The binding that goes around the outside, or the welching that goes around the outside, everything in a Stagecoach that's fabric and a binding like that is called lace. So when Doug was first talking to us about the lace that he had to order, I thought, you know, we don't really need lace in a Stagecoach, but it's actually strong cord or strong binding. What happened was we looked at the other Stagecoaches, of course, and you saw that picture of the Stagecoach in the movie, and it had a photograph or a painting of a boat on it. We thought, it would be really nice to have paintings that were Anasquam paintings. And because the person who does all the pinstriping on the Stagecoach is an artist, he was perfectly willing to use one of the old black and white images from AHS as a source to paint the lighthouse. So it's an octagonal lighthouse. When you look up close, you'll be able to see that. It was a little different for somebody sitting on a stool in South Dakota to think of the Atlantic Ocean and what color it might be. But he had some help from David. And the other painting is the schooner at the bridge, which was originally a photograph by Martha Hale Harvey. And Spike Wakeman, who's our friend, had done a painting derived from that photograph. So we sent Spike's work out to South Dakota with his permission. And so that's the painting that you're seeing. It's sort of a copy of a copy, if you will. But we thought black and white wouldn't look nearly as spectacular as the color. I wanted to give credit to Wayne, who's the artist, and I had trouble finding a photograph of him except of his back while he was painting these paintings, so I thought, that's no good. But this was from one of their local newspapers. And Doug is on the left, Doug Hansen, and Wayne Troyer, who's the artist, is on the right. And he actually comes from Ohio. He's so good at this and so specialized that they actually import him when stagecoaches need painting. Now, the dusty coach lamps had been left in a box on the second floor of the firehouse, and I didn't recognize them, David did, but they were cleaned and reset on the coach, and a spermaceti oil candle used to be the source of light in lamps in the years of whaling. One of the lamps is missing its top, but otherwise they're in very good condition. And in fact, Harry Gage used one of the lamps for a Christmas card, but actually if you look closely at it, it's not the same lamp. So we're wondering if there's another one hiding on the second floor in the firehouse that we should go look for. Take a dust cloth when you go up there and start sneezing. But Harry recognized the fact that the stagecoach would have a lamp like this. And here's the stagecoach, newly dressed, shiny paint with roof seat on it, and the luggage rack. And the roof seat's only held on by belts on the side. It's actually not bolted through the roof.
Wow.
Yeah, you gotta hang on tight. Who wants a ride, right? And the luggage rack, of course. The luggage rack in that picture from the movies was much sturdier, but they were carrying lots of things up there, including horse equipment and things like that. Ours is a rather flimsy New England roof and luggage rack. And guess who brought it back to the village? Thank you, Carla, for the photograph. She's here too. So now the stagecoach is back in the firehouse with people again helping get it in safely. There are a few people. Steve is here giving orders, right, Steve? And John Blandy was taking photographs, Boston Globe photographer. I can't see all the folks. Johnny is here. You can probably, I've not got the right view on, but you can see in the back. Don's there, right, in the red shirt? Yeah. And the guy who's standing to the far left was the driver of the transport vehicle. And his last name is Straight, which is a great name for a transporter. And he had come in with one of those big transport trucks to Gloucester, left it at Pond Road with tallies to check out whether or not Annisquam was navigable. Guess what his answer was? No way. So bless him though, he came back and he was part of the crew getting the coach back into the firehouse. So this is what it looks like in the firehouse now. It is squished up to one side to allow an alley for access. It is still air kissing the ceiling, as everybody who's helped measure. It's 8 foot 6 inches, and the top of the door sill is 8 foot 6 inches. So that's why people had to be loaded into the coach to lower it to get into and out of the firehouse. If this is a Cinderella story, what about the shoe? So this is a side view of the coach, and again, very beautifully decorated. And David is pointing me to something. What do you mean?
Break wall.
Oh, I'm not there yet. I just wanted to show what the ladies have to go up on the iron stairway in boots and long skirts to get to the coach if you're going anywhere. So it's not easy. Kathy and I had to sit in the coach, and it's not easy getting up those stairs. And oh, you were going to point out something. The brake.
The break wall.
And keep going. Next slide. And on the brake block is leather from old shoes. And the next slide will show you where the stitches are from the cobblers. So when nothing would go to waste in Yankee, New Hampshire, so they managed to use everybody's old shoes for the leather padding on the brake blocks. So the shoe completes the Cinderella story of the Annisquam Stagecoach. Bad pun. Now, Steve's got the movie, well, we're going to try and play it, I hope from here, of the return of the Stagecoach. And then after that, any questions we can try and answer.
Doug Hansen grew up here on the South Dakota Plains, and one might say he was born a century too late.
I grew up here on the ranch here in South Dakota, and we had the wood shop, the metal shop, the leather shop, and so I kind of grew up with these trades around me. My mother is still alive, and she still actively runs her saddle shop. This is a hobby that got out of control. I had a fascination with the lost art, the craftsmen of old. We love the authenticity of it. We love to do it like it was done, and that comes from my fascination with that old world craftsmanship. We've been forced to become self-sufficient, so we have our own wheelwright, we have our own blacksmith, there isn't anything that we can't make in the shop that's pertaining to a horse-drawn vehicle. Our wheelwright is using a lot of antique tools because they're not produced today, and if they are produced, they're not of the quality that we could find when it was a leading industry. We're a modern shop, but many of our pieces of equipment are antique. You know, like in the leather shop here, we have sewing machines from the turn of the century. But the shop does about 50% restoration and about 50% of replications. In a restoration process, the first thing that we do is we spend quite a bit of time just soaking up the aura of the vehicle. When we separated the body from the undercarriage, the first thing we did to do that process was to remove the doors. We analyzed the condition of the doors and the upholstery, and what we found as we started getting into that is that one door was entirely intact. It had never been messed with other than its top broadlace was over the old broadlace. And you can see the old broadlace, the color, you know, it's dusty. You can see how much better the color style goes with it than this one. We're going to maintain the interior of the coach with its original color. This door had a very warped paneling that had delaminated from the stretcher, and the burlap that preserved it was all gone. And so we were able to make a new panel which slid out through the door window channel and, you know, insert a new panel. So that's the only really wood repair that we have done other than wedging the hounds on this coach. So we're going to re-letter it with this lettering. This is a good block, Concord block style lettering. I think the inside of the coach was green. As a matter of fact, just take a look at this. So there's our jump seat with the cardboard tag is right inside here, and so we've protected that. That is the green paint that on the last paint job, and you can see the erosion taking place in here of different colors. And so when we get this all cleaned up, you'll be able to see that, and we're going to expose, and this is going to be a storyteller right here. So we have several areas on the coach that you'll easily be able to look at and say, oh, well, here's some of this history. You know, here's in the 50 years of service, here's some colors that was painted, and you know, just cut some of the color schemes. You know, this is all been replaced. This is, you know, probably in service, but late in the era. It's a wool mohair, and this has a serial number stamped in it, and so we're going to preserve that green interior on the coach. All of these construction details that Abbott Downey's craftsmen implemented into this coach, and this carries the history of the life of this coach's finish right in this door jamb. So that's going to be protected and available for future generations to make evaluations. And we found it had been upholstered 3 times. So, you know, as it wore off, they just started, just as we saw on the door, they started applying layers over the top of the existing layer and kept the coach going. As we study the interior of the coach and the different, you know, fixtures and such on the coach, you know, this has always been evident on here that it had the loops here for a backrest, and it had the footman loops up here on the bow. So this is where a strap came down and suspended a leather backrest, and these are where the backrest could be unhooked to enter the rear seat. All these little tidbits of information help us to zero in on the style of the era and, you know, what they were trying to achieve on the look of this. You know, our heritage is very important. You know, whether you're a historian or not, our heritage is who we are. That identifies it.
And the glory of the Concord stage will live forevermore. There's a Concord coach a-coming.
So none of this would have happened without David and Rita.
And the glory of the Concord stage will live forevermore.